On today's Locked On Thunder podcast, SGA dumps his agent. Victor Wembanyama is out for the season, which opens up the DPOY race, what to expect over these last 28 games, and getting you ready for March Madness in the NBA draft.
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get it going on the Locked On Thunder podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, media member, and beat writer for Thunder on SI, Rylan Stiles. Follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at LO ThunderPod. On today's show, brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. We're joined by Nick Crain from Forbes, the Uncontested Podcast, and Thunder on SI to discuss SGA dumping his agent, Wembanyama out for the year, which opens up the DPOY race, what to expect in these last 28 games, and the publisher of Draft Digest is going to help us get set for the NBA draft, which with March Madness right around the corner. Nick, how you feeling at the end of this All-Star break?
It was good to have a break. You and I got to spend some time hanging out, enjoying the break. Just like the players have a week off, the media members need the week off as well. But it's weird not having hoops, man. Like it's weird on like a Monday, Tuesday night, turn on the TV and there's just nothing. There's college games, of course, but having no NBA is just it's a strange phenomenon, and I don't like it. Yeah,
we're glad that it's back at this point, including tonight with the Thunder. But we did get some Thunder news this week while we were partaking in some fun activities at the nighttime. We had to sober up real quick with SGA dumping his agent. Nick, I don't think this is a big deal in the grand scheme of things. I think it actually should be more reassuring to the Thunder fan base, because if you were going to make some massive change or you had some massive change of heart in terms of what team you wanted to play for, that's when you need an agent. You don't need an agent to discuss the Supermax contract, which you're going to get fully, no questions asked, and you're going to get to dictate every single thing in that Supermax contract. You're that good of a player, so why give any percentage to representation? And furthermore, he did keep his marketing and that side of representation. He did keep that with him. This is fully about his NBA contract, which is pretty solidified. And like, if you feel confident in just signing that contract and going about the contract with the Thunder, then you don't need an agent. Where you need an agent is if you want to do what Jimmy Butler did. And like, that's where they come into play to advocate for you, to kind of get your demands met. And so I think that this should be reassuring to Thunder fans, but obviously the change sparked a lot of conversation, sparked a lot of concerns. I don't think that's necessary. That's necessary at this time with Shai and the Supermax.
I agree. Like, there's no representation change that could have happened with Shai that makes me strongly feel that something is happening. In fact, I would argue if Shai had, for example, moved representation and signed with Clutch, there's a tiny little bit of you that thinks, like, not that he's planning on leaving, but like, connections are real and team agency relationships are real. That could be something. But when you go from, big name representation to self-representation, I think it indicates that Shai is comfortable and confident in his situation and where he's going to be for the long haul. And so self-repping, I think, is a good thing for the Thunder. Could it go awry in a year? Could it go awry in 3 years? Sure. But I if anything, view it as a positive that Shai knows what he wants and he's going to get what he wants.
Yeah, he'll for sure get the Supermax. He'll have the biggest contract in NBA history, and we'll have a lot of fun with those numbers. I mean, he's going to get paid $80 million a year for an 82-game season. Good gig if you can get it.
Finally going to get paid the same that you do. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I would love if the man who controls the money would do that for me. But no, Shai, I don't think you should have any concerns or really even care that he dumped his agent. Now, talking about Victor, sadly, his season comes to an end with deep vein thrombosis. Clearly, the biggest story is, like, you hope he has a clean and good and healthy recovery. All indications right now is that he's going to, and that they've caught this early, and that he's going to be fine for the start of the next season, hoping that that's all true. But it does have ripple effects for the rest of this NBA season in two different ways for the Thunder. One, the play-in chase is what the Thunder care about most when it comes to the standings. They have the 1 seed all but solidified. This was a play-in hopeful And so it does change that dynamic a little bit. But more importantly, the DPOY, Defensive Player of the Year race, it was going to be Victor, probably unanimously or close to unanimously, the vote for Victor. And now everyone's going to have to scramble for the last 28 games to get their votes in for somebody else. And that's where the Thunder come in with a historically great defense. Now, right now at FanDuel, our good friends over there have Jaren Jackson Jr. as the favorite, Evan Mobley at number 2, and Lou Dort at number 3, plus 1,500 for Lou Dort. Shai and J-Dub slot in at 5 and 6 on these odds. So they have 3 members in the top 6 of the DPOY odds. And I think that could backfire on the Thunder when it comes to trying to win the award. Because if you have voters giving first place votes to Shai, J-Dub, and Lou, which all realistically can happen. Shai got votes last year. J-Dub's been elite, and we know Lou's reputation and how good he is. Then you kind of split votes from one another, and it opens up this pathway for somebody else to win the award, like a Jaren Jackson Jr. But I do think, obviously, this makes it more realistic that somebody on the Thunder could win the honor.
Yeah, like you said, hopefully Victor is fine long term. I think this is the first time since the 65-game award rule was put in place that I think you could strongly argue he should win the award only playing 46 games. Like, he has been the most dominant defensive player in the league, bar none. And this is the first time that I'd say the rule, I understand why it exists, but it's the first time where it's like, should we just say the rule doesn't matter and just give it to him anyways? But yes, like you said, FanDuel has the odds. Oklahoma City has a member at was it 3, 5, and 6, you said?
Yep.
So again, I think you're right. That does backfire in a way where you have multiple guys gunning for the same award and multiple great defenders. It's hard to pinpoint who is the best. Conversely, I think similar to the way a guy can have signature MVP moments on the offensive end and make, game-winning shots and have historic fourth quarter clutch performances. Those are the things that elevate. Stats are a big part of it holistically. I think the same can be said for defense. And if that is the case in OKC, I think it would be Lou Dort. He's had plenty of moments over the past few years where he makes a crazy play in the final 24 seconds, final 2 minutes of a game. And that to me is it's kind of like the Heisman moment. It's like the defensive player of the year moment. That being said, and I think we're going to get into this here in a second on expectations for the last 28 games, I don't know if there's going to be a ton of games that A, the Thunder need a stop to get a win, and B, if they do, the win's not going to be all that significant because they don't necessarily need to dominate the stretch, the final stretch, to earn the top seed. So I think that also, to your point, not only is it the volume of players that are gunning for the award, but also the games of consequence and the moments that these guys will get to make their signature moments are going to be probably pretty small.
Yeah, and whereas with Memphis, for example, and Jaren Jackson Jr., who is already kind of being viewed as the next favorite to win this award from the odds and from just the actual voters who are discussing this award right now, he's going to have moments like that for the Grizzlies to fend off Denver and get that 2 seed. It will be on the back of its defense. It will be on the back of these pivotal moments as these two teams are separated by half of a game right now for that number 2 overall seed in the Western Conference. And I do think that with the Thunder, it is hard to really nail down who should win it. We watch this team every single game. We watch these games multiple times after they end. And I can make a compelling case for Jalen Williams. I can make a compelling case for Lou Dort, clearly. And even Shai is this defense can't be historic with a star that you typically think of. A typical star that scores at the pace that Shai scores at doesn't play a lick of defense. And that can't happen, and you have a historic squad on that end of the floor. And Shai's contributions and the fact that Shai is viewed upon as the weak link, but still gets stops, I think matters too for his case. So it's just too hard to parse through who all should be in the running, who all should get your actual vote when it comes down to this award. I do say it opens up a spot on the all-defensive team, which Lou Dort's never made one, surprisingly, so he'll make one this year.
He'll make one this year.
Yeah, he'll make one this year. You could see the case for all 3 of them making one of the 2 teams this season as well. But ultimately, I agree with you on the games played stuff. I understand the rule. I'm not beating the drum one way or the other to disband the rule or to keep this rule enforced. I do think, though, you're already trusting these voters with such immense responsibility of these contracts matter. And if you make all NBA and you get to that point where you've made it a couple of times and you're Supermax eligible, like it does, and you have incentives, and it does change these guys' bank accounts. And so we're trusting them to change these guys' bank accounts, but we don't think that we should trust them with like, hey, how much should you value games played versus, availability versus ability, and going through all of that. So it's just kind of weird that like that's where we draw the line of if voters think that the 46 games from Victor is enough to win Defensive Player of the Year, we should let them, because we're already letting them dictate so much. You have to just continue to trust them. It's just this weird middle ground that the NBA has found itself in of when to trust them, when to not trust them.
I'm with you 100%.
Coming up, the last 28 games, the Thunder's magic number is 14. Could that lead to more losses from Oklahoma City as they try to figure things out, or will they just remain this dominant force? But first, I want to say right now about our good friends over at DoorDash, folks. NBA fans, get ready as they swish, you save thanks to DoorDash. With the Dash Pass, with the Dash Pass, every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score with a huge deal the next day. It's simple. When a player scores 50 or more during a game in the 24-25 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order up to $10 off the next day from noon to midnight. So whether you want a game day feast after an epic 50-point performance and celebrate by ordering wings, pizza, or burgers from your favorite spot delivered straight to your door, or have a late night craving if a game goes into overtime or you're just sitting there watching highlights and you want a little midnight snack, Dash Pass is going to be able to grab you something while saving big. So sign up today for Dash Pass and be ready to save. When a player scores 50 or more points in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day, up to $10 off. Just use promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating locations. Must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms and conditions apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. We're back on the Lockdown Thunder podcast, on the Lockdown Podcast Network, your teams every day. I'm Rylan Stiles. With me is Nick Crain. Nick, 28 games to go. The magic number for the Thunder is 14. If the Thunder just go 500, they secure the number 1 overall seed, even if Denver/Memphis win out and go unblemished in their last 28. So the Thunder clearly are on pace to run away with this number 1 overall seed, and they're healthier than they've ever been, which on paper is excellent, but in practice, they're going to need to explore these different opportunities now that they've been gifted. We've seen 3 games of the double big lineup. We've seen how the double big lineup is a little clunky, especially offensively. And so like you still have to work through that, even though you can roll the ball out there. And if you just put one center on the floor, Shai is going to be able to cook with a clear lane. J-Dub gets better with the clear lane. It's not as bulky and clunky offensively. That's all fine and well, but you already have that in hand. What you want to go explore is these double big situations, because even if you don't settle on that as your starting unit for most playoff matchups, you still want to have that at your disposal as this curveball to throw at teams that you didn't have a year ago. So you don't just want to throw it in the corner and forget about it for the last 28 games, even if it means having messier games that still end in wins, or having closer games that end in losses at times, just for the benefit of what it would serve for you come playoff time. So I think that these 28 games, you can't really get wrapped up in their record.
Agreed. And for context, going 500, which would take something wild happening, would put them at 58 wins, which is more than last season. So like this team is doing insane stuff. Yeah, I think when we think about the last 28 games, just setting expectations, there will be funky lineups. There will be Dylan Jones minutes. There will be Ousmane Dieng minutes. There will be times when those minutes come in a high leverage situation where you're thinking you're down 9, there's 3 minutes left in the third. This is where you chip away and checks, one of these guys that you wouldn't maybe consider a top rotation guy. And I think the most important thing, the magic number 14 is obviously very important. It probably takes less than 14 to get there, but earning the number 1 seed and being healthy is like 1A and 1B of the Thunder's expectations for the next 28 games. If you go into the playoffs healthy with the 1 seed, wild success. Doesn't matter if that's 1 game above the number 2 seed. Doesn't matter if that's 15 games above the number 2 seed. That goes out the window when the playoffs come around. Nobody cares about your regular season record. You earned your seeding. Doesn't matter the delta between you and the team below you. So being healthy is most important. So if there's rest days as well, that's another thing. If Chet rests a random game or Caruso, just remember, even if it's a game against like the Denver Nuggets that seems significant, it's really not. I would argue there's not a significant game on the schedule as things sit today the rest of the way in the regular season.
Yeah, and you look at this too of I do wonder what when Mark does try to find his playoff mix. Now, this is a guy who's going to play 10 to 11 or 12 guys even a night, even come playoff time, as he dipped into a more shallow roster a year ago, deep into the rotation in the postseason in the biggest games. So it's not as though he has to like trim the rotation a ton, but you look at this team right now heading into Utah with only AJ Mitchell and Topic on the injury report. How do you find minutes for Jones and Oos? And like, it's a difficult tightrope to walk because while Dylan Jones and Ousmane Dieng, with all due respect, are not going to play in the playoffs, are not going to be a part of your playoff plan, I would say no matter how good they play in the last 28 games, they just don't have enough time to jump other players and get into that playoff mix. However, you still need to make your decision on those two guys. Are they worth keeping around after this summer? And yes, even Dylan Jones, after his rookie season, is already on that clock because of how good this team is, because of how these roster spots are becoming a premium. And so, like, that's important to find out, even if it's not important for the postseason. It's also important for the postseason to find out how your double big stuff works. Can you get Chet back into form from being rusty, from fracturing his hip, and these other details that we're going to get into in preview? So the conversation becomes, when do you implement no Dylan Jones minutes, no Ousmane Dieng minutes? Because you're going to have, of these 28 games, like the last 2 weeks, at the pace that this season is going, you shouldn't play anybody, really. I mean, like, when you factor in the injury history of Chet, Hartenstein, and Caruso, especially those three guys, they shouldn't see the court, especially the last week of the season for the Thunder, because it will be inconsequential in the standings, and it would just be, if you're gearing up for a long playoff run, which this team thinks that they have in front of them, and everybody thinks that they have in front of them, that's a lot of minutes to tax on to Holmgren and Hartenstein and Caruso. Like, for this team to get to the NBA Finals, those guys are playing 35 plus minutes to pull that off. So every second that you can rest them throughout these last 28 games is going to be critical. And so if you look at the last 2 weeks as already having a runway for Dylan and for Oos, and cutting your one runway of seeing this team who has not played a single second together fully healthy, or even as healthy as they're going to be Friday, how do you balance that of like, okay, the 2 weeks are built in for not playing those guys. So should we start playing like a more playoff style on Friday against Utah, even though there's still 28 games left, to kind of offset that? I think that piece of the puzzle, that chess match, so to say, internal chess match from Mark, will be very interesting to see, because I don't think that the Dylan Jones and Ousmane Dieng minutes are going away, but they are valuable for the future, but they're also playing with this, hey, we haven't even seen our guys play yet together.
Yeah. And like, I completely agree with the end of the season approach. There's no reason for these primary guys to be playing late. They will probably secure the number 1 seed like weeks in advance at the end of the season. So that's a whole different story. But even like the next, let's say 10 games, I don't think the approach will be, all right, this one game is going to be a end of bench game where we're going to play a bunch of guys. I think it's going to be more situational end game. Because if you want to try to tease out or test your playoff rotation, you can do that like in the first quarter and bleeding into the second, maybe the second half. You see more of those guys. But I also think like Mark during the rebuild, one of the biggest things he harps on was situation. I wouldn't be surprised. And I'm not sitting here saying he would put a guy like Oos and Dylan Jones out there to intentionally, lose or intentionally like get into a deficit. But I think when you're testing these playoff rotations, you want to have some situations where you're up 10 and you're extending the lead, but you also want to have some situations where you're down 8 and you want to cut the lead. So like playing these guys, it's like 40 chess. Like, just because Ousmane Dieng and Dylan Jones may come in, maybe the team was up 2 and they come in and they check out and they're down 9. It's not a bad thing, because then the rotation you want the sample size on gets a little bit of a different test. I think that's important to remember too.
Yeah, and that's why if you see Dylan Jones hop off the bench first tonight against Utah, you can't immediately like freak out. You've got to think about what the bigger plan is, and that's the benefit that the Thunder have of their successful season pre-All-Star break, is that you now get to just do science experiments, have hypothesis, think about who you think could be lineup extenders, because like that's what you're going to need in the playoffs. You're going to need lineup floaters who can just not sink you. These are 5 guys that, yes, we want to play our top guys 48 minutes, but realistically, we can only play them 42 minutes or 40 minutes or 39 minutes. So who can fill in those other minutes and just not sink the entire ship? Or, so you have a floating lineup. You want to have an extending lineup of, it's not our top guys. It's not our death lineup, but we feel good that they can take a 5-point lead. And by the time Shai comes back, it's an 8+ point lead. And then you want your death lineup. And you've got to figure out all those lineups through, these last 28 games. And to your point, with how dominant this Thunder team is, and again, no offense to Dylan Jones and Noose, like you can't you can't get in those situations without playing worse players to get you there, because this team is so good top to bottom, and like it would be a double-edged sword of playing Dylan and Oos, because you want to see what they're made of, but then you also say, okay, well, if they get us in a hole, we're going to be okay to see how we dig ourselves out of this. Now, in the last 28 games, when you're looking at this roster, besides Chet's rust and besides the double big stuff, is there anything else that jumps out that you're really paying attention to?
I think it's the small series altering moves that we always give credit to a coach in a playoff series when, they throw a guy that like maybe hadn't played game 1 and 2. All of a sudden they throw him in the second quarter of game 3. And this guy just like something clicks, like the matchup or whatever clicks. Like we saw that a little bit with Kenrich last year in the Mavs series. Obviously the Thunder still lost the series, but Kenrich gave a little bit of juice in a game after like not really playing. That kind of stuff, while we should praise the coaching staff and praise guys that are the spark for doing such, you need the information during the regular season to give you the hunch that could be the spark in the playoffs. And so to answer your question, one of the things I'm looking for are those little situational things that we can identify over the last 28 games where it's like, oh, that's funky. Mark had this guy guard this position, or had this guy, run this action, do this thing. And it's easy to get lost in translation of, oh, they're just exploring and doing science experiments. But like, remember, those science experiments oftentimes can translate into the postseason.
Coming up, Nick Crain from Draft Digest is going to take us through the NBA draft with college prospects you should start paying attention to as March Madness is around the corner. But first, I want to say right now, the good friends over at FanDuel, go check it out today, because when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place a $5 bet throughout the game, so that even if you miss opening tip-off and you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, or you want to stay in the action, you can get that done. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can combine these live bets into the same game parlay, which increases your payout. FanDuel is so fun to stay engaged in these NBA games in the last 28 games of this season for the Oklahoma City Thunder. So right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. Make every moment more at FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And the Thunder are 15-point favorites against the Utah Jazz at FanDuel.com. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Talking to Nick Crain, DraftDigest.com, Uncontested Podcast, Forbes, media luminary Nick Crain. NBA Draft Talk is a perfect time right now to discuss it. It's the All-Star break. We had some Thunder news at the top of the show, but ultimately, like before the game tips off tonight, this is a more dead period. And once these games resume, we just laid out all the things that we're watching for to gear up for a long playoff run for the Thunder. So the draft talk could subside a little bit before March Madness, but the Thunder still have a chance at a lottery pick with that Philadelphia pick as they gun for the play-in tournament. They have the chance at the Miami pick, and then they have the Clippers pick swap, which will land them in the mid-20s. But Nick, who are some March Madness prospects to watch for here as conference tournaments begin pretty soon?
I mean, so like it goes without saying, like the Duke class headlined by Cooper Flagg and the Rutgers class headlined by Dylan Harper are like cream of the crop teams to watch. But a lot of those guys will not be on the board if and when the Thunder get a lottery pick. So we're not going to spend time on those guys. Let's talk some guys that could be in the cards for the Thunder. We'll start with some big prospects. I think one of my biggest takeaways, especially for the draft range the Thunder will be in, whether that's the Philly pick at like the 7, 8, 9 range, or even kind of that mid round or early first round pick that they could be working with. A handful of bigs that I like. So Colin Murray Boyles out of South Carolina. He's a guy that's rising. Like there's a good chance that by the time that the draft comes around, he's not available for the Thunder. South Carolina, kind of a combo forward. He's like super undersized, but his defense is unreal. He gets the Draymond Cup. Not really a shooter, but just a super smart player on both ends. He can defend in space. He can block shots. He's not a supreme athlete, but he can do some interesting things on the defensive end. And he just fits like the Thunder mold of smart player that enhances a lot of things you do. And if you want to talk about a team, like how do you make this team better defensively? It's guys like him. So that's one name to keep an eye on with South Carolina. Thomas Sorber out of Georgetown is another big, a freshman big, who came into the college season as a highly rated prospect, but is one that's actually popped. And he's a guy that fills up the stat sheet. Another smart player, long arms, good rebounder. I think he's a guy that if you want a backup center in OKC, if you believe in Chet and Isaiah Hartenstein being primary starters and you want like another 7-footer off the bench to primarily play with the bench unit, he's an interesting name. The third I'll give you, because you and I watched him last night, Rylan Derek Queen out of Maryland. He rocks the long sleeves, which is just such a tough look. But just thinking about his game more holistically, he's so comfortable putting the ball on the deck. He's only 6'10", and people like to knock his height because he is kind of a tweener 4'5", but he has a 7'2" wingspan. Good athlete, very strongly built, like he's got a frame ready for the NBA. He will be first team all juice on Ryland's Summer League journal. I'm already calling it now. Good passer. I buy the mid-range shot. I buy that he could be a 3-point shooter at some point in the NBA. And he's a guy that, like, hot take, if the Thunder get the 7th pick, I know you may not agree. A lot of listeners may not agree. He'd be a fun guy for the Thunder. That's Derek Queen out of Maryland.
Yeah, I think Derek Queen, honestly, barring some sort of like shocking slippage from some other top prospect, I think he should be the pick for the Thunder if they get that Sixers pick. Because, yes, the Thunder can like continue to swing for these home run hits, but they also want to ensure that they get cost-controlled contributors. And even if that's at pick 7, the value of a cost-controlled contributor, especially as you pay Chet, J-Dub, Shai this summer, far exceeds the 5% chance that somebody turns into a home run pick and the 95% chance that he turns into a nothing contributor or barely hanging on as a role player. So while the ceiling might not be there for Queen, I do think that in this Thunder system, it would be there for OKC. It would be advantageous for them to select him. The only thing that I would have concerns about would be the defense. It would be the fact that I don't view him as a guy, and you can talk about this, the defensive end. I don't view him as a guy who can switch onto the perimeter. I think that you really have to keep him in the paint exclusively. And with the Thunder style of defense, that might hurt them. But also, we know that Mark's a smart coach, and he can tweak things around. If they just switch 4 across the board and then leave him in the paint, they can really manage that given the plethora of the finish that they have.
Yeah, there's two schools of thought. You can buy into the philosophy of draft players that fit your system, and that may not be Derek Queen. I'm more of the school of thought of if you believe he can really, really enhance your offense and do a lot of awesome things, and you can insulate him defensively. And he's not a horrible defender, like, to be clear. He's just not like a Thunder level defensive guy like we've seen with a lot of these guys. But if you feel you can like scheme him and insulate him to a degree and still make him a somewhat plus defender and then get all the offensive advantages, I think that's another way you could view a prospect. Two more I'll give you. A different archetype, more of a wing shooter. These are two guys that I've seen all over the place on mock drafts and big boards. I'm going to give you Liam McNeely out of UConn. I'm going to give you Will Riley out of Illinois. The reason I bring up these two names, and they're both college freshmen at big programs, I view them as the Cam Johnson archetype. Not obviously no player comp is 1-to-1, but if you think about the jumbo shooter who can space the floor and then defensively, while they may not be elite defenders, have the positional size to at least guard a couple positions. Like if you're a Cam Johnson fan and you don't want to trade the assets for Cam Johnson or pay his contract, maybe you draft a guy that can give you some of what Cam can do. And I view both of those guys as potential rookie contributors, but definitely year 2-3 contributors. The 3-point numbers have been up and down as freshmen, as expected, but I buy their 3-point shot wholeheartedly long-term going into the NBA. So again, Will Riley out of Illinois and Liam McNeely out of UConn.
Yeah, and on that same vein, sharing some Colorado Kool-Aids this week, we did get into a Con Knipple debate with me and Derek Parker and yourself. Like Con Knipple's another guy that's interesting for Oklahoma City because of his ability to shoot and play on the ball some to create more for this offense that at times needs a lot more creation. And then defensively, you'd have to kind of hide him. I don't think that he can become that athletic defender. But I want to go back to Queen really quick because I'm just fascinated with this guy. Is it way off base to just say that like Queen gives you what you're looking for from Dylan Jones? As prospects, they were vastly different. But whenever you see how the Thunder are implementing Dylan Jones as this 4/5 off the ball kind of guy, like Queen just does all that stuff only times 10, like to a way better degree than Dylan Jones.
100%. I would say like comp wise, I would put Derek Queen in the Şengün Sabonis archetype, where they're both, or all three of them, are cerebral and they're like stockier builds and they're good rebounders and they stuff the stat sheet. They're double machines. But all three have questions with their like jump shot and like, can they become better defensively, especially on the perimeter? So they're that archetype, which is very different than Dylan Jones, to your point. But a lot of the things that you want from Dylan Jones is positional versatility. He had passing upside in college, playing a bit of point guard. Derek Queen does not play point guard, to be clear, but his passing is very, 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 very good. So yeah, I think you're onto something there. Like, not to say that they would draft a player to replace a player, but if you took all of the hypothetical things that Dylan Jones does and all the hypothetical things that even J. Will does, and kind of morph them together, I think a lot of what Derek Queen does fits that mold.
He'd kind of be in the middle of that Venn diagram, especially if the J. Will, like, because we're still trying to figure out how good of a shooter J. Will is. Like, there are some numbers you can look at from his past that suggest he's a good one. There's some numbers you can look at from his college days with this season that suggest, oh, maybe he's not as good as we thought he was. Like, we're still trying to figure out what the 3-point shot is for J. Will. No matter what, we know that the 3-point shot is not there to the degree of like forcing to move the defense, which is the most important part of all of this. So like none of the three can bend the defense just by standing on the 3-point line. J. Will can convert, I think, better than both of the two other guys we're talking about in Jones and Queen. But again, if it doesn't move the defense, it doesn't move the needle a whole ton. So I do think that what you're asking Jones and J. Will to do, I think Queen does better than both of them already in the college ranks. And they've had some success going into that Maryland pipeline, Nick. So maybe there's a connection there. But Nick, this has been great. This has been fun. Let them know what you've got cooking up and where they can follow you at.
At Crain NBA on X/Twitter. It's cooking up a bunch of draft stuff as we get closer. Mock drafts, big boards, player profiles. Rylan may not admit it, but Rylan knows a thing or two about the draft as well. So don't let him act like I'm the expert here. He has a lot of great ball knowledge too on the draft. So looking forward to doing more of this, especially as we get closer to June.
It'll be a lot of fun. You can go check us out at draftdigest.com, which is, of course, on SI, and then Thunder on SI as well, where you can find even more Thunder content. But until next time, be good and be good to one another.